Hello, my name is Julie, and this is Stamp with Julie Baum. On today's episode of Simply Saturday, I'm going to be showing you another fast and easy card. I think you're going to want to try this layout. Let me tell you about the papers that you're going to need. Of course, you can change up your color scheme, but I'll give you the names of the things that I'm using in case you're copying or are just curious. So I'm beginning with a card base that is Lost Lagoon. It measures 7 1/4 inches by 5 1/2. I have a vanilla piece that is 2 7/8 inches by 5 3/8 inches. My piece of designer series paper is 2 3/4 inches by 5 1/4 inch. I have another piece of very vanilla, and this piece is a little bit different than this one. This piece measures 2 3/4 by 5 3/8 inches. I have a secondary piece of designer series paper that coordinates and looks nice with that one. This piece measures 1 1/4 inches by 5 3/8. Then I needed a scrap of Calypso Coral and a scrap of Very Vanilla to cut out my shapes with dies. I also have a little scrap here of Lost Lagoon ribbon. So let's get started. On the piece of cardstock, I went ahead and made a score at 5 1/2 inches. So when I fold this, it is going to give me this look. And this is the direction that the card is going to go and open and shut like this. So for this front panel, we're going to take that piece of Very Vanilla and the first piece of designer series paper, and we're going to attach those to each other. Now on this particular card, I did not use 1/4 inch boundaries, that didn't sound right, 1/4 inch around like I normally would. In other words, this piece 1/4 inch in length and width down from this one. Instead, I only used 1/8 of an inch. So I've got a tiny little bit of border around, okay? And same with my vanilla piece onto the Lost Lagoon. So I've got each piece sized down by 1/8 of an inch today instead of 1/4 inch. All right. So I'm going to attach this piece to that Very Vanilla. Now, Very Vanilla is not a neutral that I reach for very often. I usually use designer series papers that look better with white, and so I use white a lot of the time, but this particular paper does have a background in vanilla. So because of that, I've chosen the Very Vanilla cardstock. All right, so I've got that in place, and now I'm going to attach it to the front panel of the card. And again, with that tiny little border, I guess that's the word I was looking for in the beginning. So we can just eliminate that word boundary. All right. My border there, you can see, is just peeking out behind that panel. Looks very nice. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is my attaching of the papers on the inside. So I will tell you that if you wanted to use a larger piece here, you could certainly use a piece that was either 4 inches by 5 1/4, that would fit in here, or you could use a piece that was 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. That would totally fill this space with just that little tiny border all the way around. That would be a great way to go. But in order to save paper, I went ahead and cut this piece down, and then this piece is just going to overlap it. So you can imagine if this was a whole piece of vanilla, it would have come all the way over, and then I would have just put this on top. But I felt like we could save some paper by doing it this way. So I have my Very Vanilla cardstock, and I'm going to put it practically right up to the fold. The fold does take a little pinch of room, and so I'm going to have my top and bottom border equal. And like I said, I'm putting this pretty much right up to the fold. Maybe not quite touching, but as close as you can get without it touching. And then for this piece, it will slightly overlap onto the vanilla piece. We could have trimmed it down another smidge and made it fit right up against it, but I thought that this would look messy if it wasn't exactly straight. So I think that the eye, it's going to be a little bit more forgiving if we let it go ahead and cover the edge of that vanilla piece. Okay, and then I kind of feel like this paper has a direction. I don't know if those are stems or wheat or what they are, but they seem to be growing up. So I wanted to make sure that the direction of my paper was the right way. So if you are using a non-directional paper, it won't matter. But if you are using a directional, make sure that your 1 1/4 is the narrow part. This is the top. And then this is the direction for the 5 3/8, the long part. All right, and so I'm looking at my teeny little border here on the right, the top and the bottom, and this is going to overlap that vanilla piece as I mentioned. Okay, all those pieces are in place. All right, I chose to use these shapes, and I did cut a larger one out of the Calypso Coral and a little smaller one out of the vanilla. And I'm using the stamp that says, "I hope your day is filled with joy." I'm going to go ahead and stamp it in Calypso Coral ink. And I'm just going to try to eyeball it and center it onto this piece. And I have an inky smudge right there, which does happen on occasion. So I'm going to clean off my stamp. We're going to do a little remedial stamping here to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is grab a Stampin' Pierce mat, which a Stampin' Pierce mat is encouraged for photopolymer stamps, although I don't always reach for mine. Quite often you can get very clear images without using it, but if you find that you're struggling, it's definitely the way to fix the problem. So I'm just going to flip this over, and I know this is going to drive some of you crazy because this die cut pretty much has a front and a back. So now I am using the back, but for the purpose of this tutorial, that'll be fine. All right, I'm going to be a little bit more careful as I'm inking my stamp so as not to maybe get some in that extra space. And as I said, this is a little bit remedial, but I am going to make sure that we don't have a mistake the second time. So I'm going to take a scrap paper and test my stamp before I do it on my cardstock one more time. And so I've got my mat in place, inked very carefully, pressing down without rocking or wiggling, and my image is nice and clear. So I'm clear to move forward. Okay, so once again, I'm going to center this and get my beautiful Calypso Coral image on there. There we go. And attach this to my Calypso Coral piece that is already die cut. I would almost be tempted to turn this one over too, so that they both have the little dots up, but I'm not going to do that. Okay, I'm lining this up so it's fairly centered, and there we go. All right, this now is going to go onto the front of my card, and it's going to be positioned like this, where part of it is hanging over. So I want to make sure that I put my adhesive only on this area over here that is going to get stuck down to the front panel of the card. So I'm going to go ahead and use some tear and tape for this today. You could definitely, let's see, I want it on this part. You could definitely use your liquid glue. It would be just fine. But I'm just going to use a couple strips of my tear and tape. And I know that I want to stay away from the very center because of how the positioning is going to go here. So I'm just going to put one extra little piece right here. I could have done 3 long ones, but it's kind of overkill. You don't need that much to hold this on there. All right, and then we'll just remove all of that backing. And this can go into place. And as long as I'm over far enough that I'm going to put all of that tape on this side, I don't want to accidentally pull it over too far this way. And I'm going slightly higher than center. You could totally decide depending on what shape you use here, because I am going to show you another card with a different shape. So depending on the shape and your stamped image, of course, you could decide where this goes, but I like it centered and then moved slightly higher. All right, so now that is in place. As you can see, you have plenty of space to write a message in here. I am going to stamp the inside of mine. If you wanted to skip that step, you totally could. So I'm just using a little leafy branch and my Lost Lagoon ink pad. And I'm just gonna do one stamp on the inside right from the ink pad. And then I'm going to stamp it a second time without re-inking, so I get a lighter version just right next to it. All right, so there we have the inside of the card. I think that that does nicely. And let's put some decorations on the front. So I have that little scrap of Lost Lagoon ribbon. I'm simply tying a knot. And then I'm going to trim up these ends a bit. So I'm just going to cut it on an angle. And attach this with a glue dot. Let's see. Glue dots are here. Right within reach, but I couldn't see it. Okay, so it's taking the knot part of my knot that I created. I'm just going to stick it right down there on the glue dot, press it down so it sticks to the ribbon, and then pull it off the backing. And then in this instance, I'm just going to position it right here, centered onto that vanilla piece underneath the words. I think that's a nice touch. All right, and then let's put some little gems on here to finish it off. So I'm going to use the Tinsel Gems 3-pack, and this kind of blue-green color is Lost Lagoon, so it's going to coordinate with the cardstock quite well. And so I think I'm probably just going to go ahead and do 3. So I'm going to use a larger one up here. You have so many options. You could put some gems on this piece. You could trickle them down the Designer Series paper. I'm just going to kind of scatter them on the Designer Series paper. And then stick with me for just another moment and I'll show you a second card that is super similar, but just a little bit different, just to give you a second idea. All right, so there are, I was going to use a small one, but I think I want a large one there. So I'm going to trade this, stick it back on the sheet and grab a large one instead. Yeah. All right, and there we have our lovely card for today. All right, let me show you the other one that I made. So I used the same Designer Series paper and the same color of cardstock for the base in Lost Lagoon. The same papers also. So the only difference in this one is I went ahead and used large and a slightly smaller circle instead of this rounded rectangle. And then I've got a little ribbon here, and this is kind of interesting. Even though the color in the paper is crushed curry, I had some ribbon from when Bumblebee was one of the in colors a couple years back. So this is actually Bumblebee ribbon, and I think it works just fine with the crushed curry. It's actually just a little bit more intense. The crushed curry on this paper is kind of soft. Let's see if I can tighten that. But I think it totally works. And then here I used some sequins instead, and then I did the inside the same way. So there's two super similar cards, and but along with the same idea. So that is our Simply Saturday card for today. I am going to put a bunch of information for you below this video, including the name of the designer series paper that I used, all of the dimensions of the papers, as well as the different dies that I used for the two different cards. So be sure and check that out. I'd love to hear from you. Please leave me a comment and thumbs up this video. Be sure to share it with your crafty friends too. Until next time, happy stamping.